Hi, welcome to Promo Insiders, an ASI media podcast that covers the issues that matter most to the promotional products industry. I'm Chris Ruvo for ASI, and today we're going to be talking about Promo's strong Q3, how Q4 is shaping up, whether or not a new industry sales record could be set this year, and what may lie ahead in 2025 for Promo, including taking into account the just concluded presidential election. Here to dig into the numbers and narratives with me is Nate Kuzma, ASI Senior Executive Director of Research. Nate spearheads the Distributor Quarterly Sales Survey from ASI Research that charts the industry sales performance and more. The latest version of that study, which was released last week, shows that promo distributors had their best quarterly performance in over a year in the third quarter of 2024. And that's where we're going to start. Nate, thanks for being with me today.
Happy to be here, Christopher. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm doing pretty good. So let's see here on Q3. How much did distributors increase sales in the third quarter of 2024? When I say increase, we're of course talking about Q3 2024 compared to Q3 2023. What
Correct.
was the annual basis increase?
Yeah, so the sales were up pretty significantly. It was up over 4%, so just like 4.1% year over year, which is a fairly significant rise considering the fact that we'd been, hovering in like the 1 to 2%, or even, in Q1 of this year in like the negative,
Mm-hmm.
1%. So it was a welcome surprise to see that businesses and business in the promo industry came back a bit in Q3.
All right, and you mentioned I think the last time that we saw, I think it was Q2 of 2023, we saw it was over 5%. So that
Yeah.
was the most significant prior increase. So it had been over a year, as I'd mentioned in the intro, since we saw an uptick that significant a size. So just broadly speaking, what drove that performance?
I think it was like pent up spending. I really think it was. I think it was end buyers pent up spending, and especially amongst corporate, like bigger corporate buyers, right?
Hmm.
So when we look at these sales, we break these down by the smallest distributors all the way up to distributors who are selling 1 to 5 million and 5 million or more, and the distributors that have had the hardest year this year in terms of overall sales were those that were selling that 1 to 5 million space. So they're well beyond the mom and pop shops and the sole
Hmm.
proprietors, but they're not quite at the big corporate gigantic companies yet, right? They're in
Hmm.
that mid range. Sometimes they're the fastest growing, sometimes they're the fastest shrinking, right?
Hmm.
So they in Q2 they had a pretty poor Q2. The clients that they were dealing with, the clients that they typically sell, were not buying as much then. They were really holding on. What we saw was a reversal of that in Q3. In fact, those distributor sales rose over 7% Q3
Okay.
24 versus Q3 23. So again, I think what it was really just like a release of spending
Hmm.
after clients had been kind of holding on to it a bit tightly. And I know we're going to talk about this later, but I think with the election behind us, and no matter what side of the aisle you're on,
Hmm.
right? Not having the uncertainty that we've had in the past that is, drawn this process out for months and months, sometimes even into the next year, right?
Hmm.
Not having that is going to be welcome for the overall financial markets, probably. But I also think for spending, because one thing that people hate is uncertainty. There's no uncertainty this time.
Yeah. Not to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but as we sit here today recording this on the morning of November 6th after the election, the Dow was up 1,300 points this morning. So I think that speaks a little bit to what you're talking about. We've just had something concluded, and that
Correct.
helps bring certainty. Just to stay on distributors of different revenue classes. So I just want to make sure everybody understands for what we were talking about when we say 1 to 5 million. That's annual sales for a distributorship, and that's how we look at
Correct.
these distributors. That we put them into these different annual revenue categories, and distributors in that 1 to 5 million range, they were up over 7%. But I think distributors, it wasn't just solely their performance
No,
that
no,
that
no. All
drove
distributor sizes were up.
all distributor sizes are, and I think that that's an important point that
Yeah.
literally distributors of all revenue classes. So we have them into categories like hey, if you're on the small side, $250,000 in annual revenue and below, those distributors increase
Sure.
sales.
Yep.
The top 40 distributors and those making 5 million and above in annual revenue, they increased it. So it really was an across the board win for the industry, and I think that's an especially encouraging thing.
It was, and as we, it hasn't always been that way, especially post COVID, right? There's been a little bit more volatility. Pre COVID, it tended to be that way. The ones that were tended to be the lowest or the most volatile tended to be the smallest distributors. COVID has kind of leveled the playing field. Everybody has a chance to be volatile one quarter or another, for better or for worse. So I think that's what we saw here. But to your point, that's absolutely correct. Every distributor size did show at least modest increases in Q3.
All right. So good stuff there. Now, an interesting little quirk of the day. This just, I think, further shows that we're not just acting as industry cheerleaders here, that we actually are cracking numbers and being realistic about our assessments on of where things are. Despite all distributor revenue sizes increasing sales, the Counselor Confidence Index, which has a 23-year history of measuring
Yeah.
distributor optimism and financial health of business, etc., it was stuck on 96. That was the same reading as in Q2, and it was below the baseline of 100. I'm just curious. I don't remember. Maybe there's not a definitive answer, but why do you think that is? Why don't you think we saw a corresponding rise in confidence despite what was a fairly strong sales quarter?
Because we were waiting for what happened yesterday, as of when we're recording this podcast, right?
Yeah.
So the study was fielded right at the end of Q3. So it was like the last couple of days of September into the first 2 weeks of October. That's genuinely when the quarterly sales survey is fielded. So at that point, there was still in the US and Canada, for that matter, because Canada is paying attention to what's happening in the US, a lot of uncertainty and a lot of people kind of sitting on their hands and biting their fingernails and doing things like that, because we didn't know what was going to happen. And generally speaking, when there's that environment and you're kind of waiting for something to happen, it's often gives you a little bit, it puts you more in a state of cautiousness
Uncertainty.
than
Yeah.
even if what happened wasn't what you wanted it to. At least
Okay.
now people know. But when we did this study, there was certainly some nervous feelings, probably across the board, that was holding back that. Will that change in Q4? I would anticipate it will, right? I would anticipate not having the process of the election drag on for months will help the overall promotion market and potentially the economy as a whole. So, but that's really what I think, kind of made it hold steady, Chris, was just the fact that there was so much outside of the industry that was also going to be that was impacting overall business conditions.
All right, that makes a ton of sense, and there's even data that you were able to call or pull, I should say, that sort of speaks to that, because for the full year, the projected Counselor Confidence Index, so it's, hey, not just how I feel in Q3, but how this year 2024 is going to go overall.
Yeah.
The index was back above the baseline of 100. I think
Correct.
It was around 102. So do you
Correct.
think that's almost like people were saying we needed to kind of get this whole election thing, so to speak, behind us before we could truly feel confident again?
I think that's accurate. I think to a point. I think that's up. No, I think to a point that's 100% true. Right? Like, I think so. What you saw was last year's Q4 was a poor quarter, right? It was up under 1% from the year before, and that's still, when you look at 2022, we were out of COVID, but we were still kind of recovering a bit. So Q4 really kind of kicked people in the gut a little bit last year, because optimism was high, very high coming into it, and it didn't deliver on the results. I think what you're seeing this year is people are realizing that last year was not good, so they're optimistic for Q4 this year, probably with good reason, honestly, because I do think that is sort of where the year is trending.
Okay. All right. On that point, you kind of segued nicely there to my next question, which is how, I know it's early. I know there's not a ton of data pulled yet, but just even if it's just anecdotally from what you're hearing, and I could chime in on this too, how do you feel Q4 is shaping up for the industry?
Yeah, so anecdotally speaking only, And from what I understand, that we've been through election cycles here. This is the third election cycle I believe I've been through here. And by far, what I would consider to be the one that is at post-election most straightforward. My gut tells me that Q4 will be a strong quarter, especially when compared to last year. And the year itself is trending upward, right? All except for that one quarter when it was down just under 1%.
But even to that point, to interject there, hey, we started that we were down, I think it was like 0.9% in Q1,
Yeah.
but then we had like a 2% or so, 2.5% or so tick up in Q2.
And then
we built on that in Q3, so there was a higher percentage. So it seemed to, I think you make a great point that we're kind of going up the stairs, so to speak.
Yeah, so that's exactly the way it is. So I think you're going to have, looking forward into Q4, I would anticipate it being strong. We won't know until the end of the year, right? Because God knows anything can happen. Nobody really knows. To shake the confidence of the overall market, both globally, but also the promotional market in the U.S. and Canada. But I would anticipate it right now. It's trending in the proper direction for the industry.
All right, gotcha. And I feel like just to throw my thoughts out there, and again, anecdotally, just speaking to suppliers and distributors, that we are going to have at minimum a decent Q4 as an industry for the reasons you said. One of them, the biggest ones, is earlier. Buyers are coming off the fence. There are buyers who I think have been hesitant. They have budgets to spend. They need to spend them. Some of the big uncertainties in the marketplace. Will Federal Reserve cut interest rates? Who's going to win the presidential election? Things like that were really weighing on like on corporate business or C-suites have now been answered. This question been answered. So it's like, okay, we can start to invest. Here's what it's going to be. Here's how we'll approach it, and let's do some marketing now. So. So hopefully we'll be right, and there's no meteor doesn't strike or anything like that to derail us. So that's good. With that in mind, we've now, as we alluded to, hey, Q1 was down, but Q2, Q3, and we're hoping Q4 looks like it's going to be up. Are we going to hit an industry sales record this year?
Yeah, I think that's pretty. I mean, barring something catastrophic happening, which the reason it's catastrophic is because you can't foresee it coming, right? The answer is yes. It's going to be above the $26.1 billion that we saw last year. So yeah, I would anticipate strongly that it will be above that. Again, barring something completely and totally unforeseen happening.
Okay. All right. So, and of course, we never know what could happen to derail things. But if current trajectory is maintained, you do see a sales record this year. Now, I know some people will say, hey, some of the shine's taken off of that because inflation does where inflation is compelling sales because but still it doesn't negate the fact that you could apply that to almost any industry, right? That inflation has pumped up top line sales numbers. So I mean, we are seeing legitimate business growth. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's not like this is the case where nobody's wrong depending on your point of view. Like both views are correct. Listen. Prices overall, the consumer price index is up over like 10 or 12% from the beginning of mid 2022, I guess, beginning of 23. Okay. So that's pushing prices up, not only in our industry, but across the board. So no, is business still challenging? Yeah, business is still challenging because we're not up that much, relatively speaking, in terms of inflation. But with that said, it doesn't negate the fact also that, yeah, we are still going to set a sales record in the industry, most likely in 2024. So both views are correct. There's definitely, you can be very cautious about it. And I think that that's a fair place to sort of be, but it doesn't mean that it's not happening.
All right, good perspective there. So we've hit on this to a degree. Geez, this could be a whole topic in itself, but what do you say the outlook is for 2025 for our industry, taking into account the fact that there's going to be a new administration in the White House? Not the sole subject, but just as part of the industry outlook for 2025.
Yeah, I mean, geez, we're going to be back in the land of tariffs, I think, Chris. Like, not that we ever got fully out of them. I mean, to be clear, but they're going to be front and center again in terms of discussion, right? So what do I think? Listen, the industry except for 2020, grew under President Trump from 2016 to 2019,
Mm-hmm.
right? It declined in 2020, but the whole world declined in
Sure,
2020.
that was not a fault of any that was a global pandemic. So
Right. So then,
yeah.
and then it grew under President Biden from 2021 all the way through most likely this year, right?
Hmm.
So, no, I think that generally speaking, again, the industry tends to be pretty resilient
Hmm.
and to grow even when economic conditions are not particularly strong, barring again a global pandemic or something like that. So, no, looking forward to 2025, it's going to be the challenges of how do we deal with whatever policies are put in place by the new administration. We don't exactly know what they're going to be at or what impact they are. So
Hmm.
there is some much more uncertainty than there is what I feel for the next month and a half,
All right,
right?
fair.
So what I say it's probably going to at least continue an upward trajectory if Q4 does. Sure, there's no
Yeah.
reason to believe it, but how much or what could be the barriers to
Hmm.
strong growth, we don't know yet.
All right, fair play, fair play. I'll say that I am optimistic, cautiously optimistic about 2025 for the industry. I do think that there is a perception among business leaders that we do have a pro-business or business-friendly administration coming in. And if certain policies are enacted, such as lowering the corporate tax rate has been one of the things discussed, lowering, various other policies that could increase cash flow and disposable cash for businesses, I think that could bode well for our industry. And then also just the fact that I don't think we're concerned about tariffs as an industry. I don't know if all end buyers necessarily are, I don't know to what degree. So if I'm a marketing, if I'm looking to market and brand build, and I want to use merch to do that, I don't necessarily think what's going on with tariffs is going to affect my
Not
decision
right now.
making.
The only
Yeah.
the place where it will come about is how much of the
Do we pass
tariffs that are
along?
being proposed or passed
Yeah.
along.
Yeah.
That's where you could see. So listen, is
Sure.
that likely to stifle spending and completely?
Yeah.
Probably not. But but might it make people take a second look, and might it
Hmm.
increase the selling that needs to be done by distributors?
Yeah.
Yeah, it might.
Okay. All right, interesting stuff. So basically, jury is out on 2025, but we're seeing and anticipating record sales in for the industry in 2024. We're expecting to end on a strong note. Again, major caveats, unforeseen issues aside, and there's at least some optimism that going into 2025 is well, who the administration is going to be.
Right.
They kind of have a stated position. Adapt your business to that accordingly and try to move forward.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, Nate. Well, thank you for joining me today. It was fun to actually talk about some good stuff on sales numbers for the industry, and hopefully Q4 is every bit as good as we're both anticipating.
Just hoping, Chris. Thanks a lot.